So let's talk about wholesaling. We get this question quite a lot, and I want to be very, very clear of the commercial real estate world of wholesaling, because I feel like a lot of people are kind of misinterpreting what I mean by it, and I think that there's a lot of misunderstandings in this industry. Where wholesaling specifically makes sense, I think, is the most important topic to talk about, okay? As a commercial real estate agent, you have to think about it from the lens of, or the way I see it is, where does the opportunity makes sense to wholesale versus broker off market? We find a lead, somebody who would like to sell their property, call it a 123 Main Street, and this property seller wants to sell it for $1 million. In what instance would I sell this property as an off-market broker, right? Well, when would I off-market broker it, and when would I wholesale it? And I'll even dive into when to acquire it. So let's break this down. Property for $1 million. When would I acquire this property? We're going to go in order. Acquire, wholesale, broker. I would acquire this property if I can get an internal rate of return of pretty close to 30%, which basically means I could probably sell this building for, let's say, $2 million in 5 years. Okay, I'm ballparking with you, but just to give you some reference, if a property increases by 100%, in 5 years, you take 100% divided by 5 years, you get 20% a year, okay? So overall, if you can make 25 to 30% a year internal rate of return on a property, which by the way, it's a little bit higher than that just because I'm only putting down the down payment. So like technically, if I'm putting down $300K on $1 million, 300 now turns into 1.3 because I put 300 grand down, added $1 million in equity. It's actually substantially higher than that. It's like 300 or 400% return, right? My point is, I would buy it when it's a substantially good deal over a period of time. I'm buying it for a very good basis. I have to fix it up a little bit, and I can increase the value of this asset by probably, and ideally double. That's what we look for. We look for at least doubles, if not 50% is even a fantastic range as a baseline, okay? Which means that I'm buying it for $1 million. In 5 years or so, it will be worth 1.5 or greater. I want to understand something. There's a difference here, because when would I acquire versus wholesale, right? So now it's like, let's kind of see both lenses here. If the property day one, I acquire it for $1 million, I can buy this deal for $1 million, and I can see it because both options are valuable. It depends on my cash position, because I want you to see this as the same lens. $1 million. Let's say the property day one, I can sell it for $1.5 million. Okay, day one, and it will be worth $2 million in 5 years. I'm buying it as a very good deal. My determination of if I wholesale it versus acquire it, because both would be obviously pretty damn smart, okay? If I should buy it, I should, this is an interesting deal. Obviously, if I'm buying it at $500,000 less than what I could sell it for today, I probably should just buy it, right? It depends on my cash position, because we buy between 3 and 10 properties a year. So if I'm in a period of time where, right now I'd rather have the 500, I'm just going to wholesale it. Okay, and I even recommend for anybody watching, if your checking account doesn't make you smile, you probably should just take the wholesale fee instead of trying to stop, don't think about buying the deal. Like, just take the 500 and run. Now, I'm going to explain to you the difference here also, which is you find a deal. Let's just say it's $1 million, and you could sell it day one for, here's where we're going to get interesting with the wholesale versus broker. Let's say you can sell it for $1.1 million. You got a guy wants to sell it. He's willing to sell it for $1 million, and you can sell it for $1.1 million today. Okay, all day long you can sell it for $1.1 million. Matter of fact, you have a buyer who's willing to pay $1.1 million. Okay, well now we have a question to make. Because if you take $1.1 million at 6% commission, which means you broker it off market, you're going to make $66,000. But if you wholesaled it, you're going to think in your head you're going to make $100,000, right? So you have 100 versus 66, two different numbers. I mean, one is almost 50% more. So you have to think to yourself, when does it make sense for me to wholesale? Well, let me give you my 2 cents. When you double close, which is essentially, the reason why I double close is because, one, if you do an assignment, the buyer and seller will see on a HUD how much you're going to be paid. On the HUD, on the closing documents, it shows you what the assignment fee is. It's there, right? Like, it's public information there. When you double close, which by the way, you could talk to me separately, but just very quickly, when you double close, I am closing on this property for $1 million, and in the same 15-minute period, same day, I'm then selling it for 1.1. It's like simultaneous closing. Now, when you do this, I have closing costs. I have to pay my attorney twice. He's handling 2 different deals. I pay my attorney twice. I am now paying 2 sets of closing costs, right? Because I have the title recording fees and everything else. Like, I am paying 2 sets of closing costs on it. So there is a cost to wholesaling, okay? It's not like, when you do assignments, because I want you to understand something. When you do an assignment, which think about when I think assignment, I think of small fees. Okay, that's what in my mind. Okay, like it might not be true reality. In my mind, assignments. If you're gonna make 25 grand on a deal, like you have a house, 100 grand, you're gonna flip it for 125. I'll assign it, right? 25K. It's okay. Instead of double closing, because you're not gonna make any money, by the way, if you double close for 25,000 bucks, you just assign it. But obviously, at EXP Commercial, I get paid 100% commission throughout the year, right? Because we have a very low cap, no fees, or very little fees. So I get paid 100% commission. So like, I would rather just off-market broker it and make 99% of my commission check, right? Of that 66K, I make 99% of it. It doesn't really matter. So I would make 65K. It's not going to change how I feel about it. But with 100, I'm probably going to pay something in the vicinity of like, call it about 2 points total to close. Now, again, I don't need, I've said I have a pretty good process. I have the right title company, the right attorneys, where I don't even need to have transactional funding. If everyone agrees to use my title company, they will actually just use the funds from the second closing to close on my deal. Okay, so I don't even need to come to the table sometimes with a deposit. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It depends if they're willing to use my title company and and utilize my attorney's escrow account. Because if they will, I don't even need to show deposits, which is pretty cool. What I'm trying to say to you, though, is that Adam, to answer your question, and to everyone here, I will double close when the fee, the spread, okay, the delta between what I have it locked for and what I can sell it for is somewhere in the vicinity of like 15 minimum percent. Maybe 12, and maybe bare minimum, because it depends on the size of the deal. But somewhere between 12 and 15% or higher, it makes sense for me to double close. Because I want you to understand, if you take the same exact example, I'm going to have to pay from 1.1 to $1 million, right? That 100 grand delta, I'm going to pay probably 20-ish grand in closing costs. So now I'm going to make 80,000 bucks, okay, versus 66,000. Now you're like, well, 80 grand versus 66. It's like, okay, well, what would you rather do? Here's the thing though. If they don't agree to my attorney's escrow account, I have to come up with a deposit, which will probably be $25,000. So now I'm going to lock up 25 grand. Number two, also keep in mind that the buyer will probably also find out that you're going to be double closing. So it's like not just going to be this hidden thing 9 times out of 10. It's not this hidden thing. Like people will know, right? And they're going to find out probably around when title gets pulled, because when they pull title, it's not my name on it, right? It's not your name on it, right? Like they're going to know you're double closing because you're not currently the owner of the property. Like, wait a second, like, well, how are you able to sell? You understand what I'm saying? You have to be careful. And I'm willing to play the game and risk, right? And like, obviously, like, I don't have any real downside other than I can lose the buyer. Now, obviously, the buyer has to be very interested in the deal, but I can lose the buyer when they find out I'm double closing. Now, not every single time are they going to fall out, but 10, 20% of the time they will fall out, right? Because they don't want to deal with the double close. They don't want to deal with this flipping of a contract. Some people don't like doing that. However, when I'm making 15% on a deal or more, yeah, I'll risk it, right? Of course. Like, I'm not going to run it through my brokerage. That makes no sense. It's like 66 versus 150. That's stupid. But if I'm going to make 80 versus 66, I'm going to do the 66 probably because it's just cleaner. That to me just makes sense. And also, again, I'm ballparking figures. It might be 25K. It just depends on what the closing costs are, right? So then all of a sudden it's 70 versus 66. You should have just brokered the deal off market. When I do my wholesale deals, most of the time it's almost 20%. I'm just going to be honest with you. Like the vast majority of the time I've double closed, it's around 20% commission, quote unquote. Or at least give you a ballpark figure of price range, right? 15, 20 and change percent, roughly. Obviously, it depends on the size of the deal. But just keep that in mind that it also depends. The last thing I'll also say is it also depends on how I show up to the seller. Because I have a relationship with the seller in some instances, like a deal we're working on right now. The whole conversation for the last year, because it's taken me a year to get here. The whole last conversation for the last year is that I'm the buyer. And then he comes to me and he says that he's willing to sell for X price. And I'm like, okay. I bring it out to my team. My team ends up selling the deal at a higher price. And I'm like, okay, well, now I have a decision to make of, hey, how do I back end to brokering this deal? I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to take a wholesale fee and pay my agents on a commission because he thinks I'm the buyer. And I'm not going to just be like, actually, this guy's buying it because I built the relationship and he's okay selling me the deal. That's why I'm winning the deal. I've been in a relationship with this guy for a year. I'm not going to screw up the deal and go like, oh, well, I'm just going to broker it now. I mean, thankfully, it's enough money where it makes sense for me to wholesale and pay out the team, right? Like that's fine. But not every deal is the same way, right? So if you're starting up a conversation for the last year, you're a broker, it's a little bit easier to then, be like, oh, okay, well, you're the broker in this deal, not a problem, whatever. And then all of a sudden you want to wholesale it, doesn't really make anything strange. But when you're calling from the lens of the buyer, right, Adam, like let's say you and I are partners and we're talking to the seller for a year and they know us as the buyer. We've met them, shook their hand face to face. They see us as the buyer. And then last minute we go, actually, there's going to be this guy who buys it. You don't know. It's a little bit more complicated to go backwards and forward. You know what I'm saying? Or forwards and backwards. You understand? So like, it just depends on how the deal's set up. And it depends on what the spread looks like. If the spread is large enough, I'll wholesale it. I have no problem. Right? I even had this warehouse deal, which we're actually in contract now on, where it started out as a wholesale, right? I was locking this thing up for 1.8 million bucks, and I was flipping it for 2.2. I was going to make 400 grand. I was super excited about it. No problem. And then in the meantime, while we were working on negotiating, number one, his family got me to come up in price. I'm now at $2,075,000. Okay, which was really fucking annoying. I was excited to get it for a great price. But thankfully, it's still a pretty damn good deal. My internal rate of return is around, high 20s. Very, very straightforward deal. But now I'm at $2,075,000. I still have the guy at 2.2. I could flip it for 125K, right? But we both know it's not going to be 125K because I'm fucking playing double closing costs. I'm only going to make maybe 80 grand, maybe 90 grand, right? I got to pay like 2 points of closing costs. I can either make 80 or 90 grand, which I'm not complaining about. Or because I'm going through a 1031 exchange, I'm selling another property. My partner and I are making over $1 million on it. We need to move our money. So again, we just talked about cash position. My cash position is now fine, like in a position where I need to buy something. So I'd rather just take it down myself and make 20 to 30% a year on the investment versus making 80 G's. So like that's why I'm saying it really is so personally dependent and deal dependent because it will always change. Now, obviously, if I wasn't closing on this deal and I'm like, hey, I have nothing to buy or whatever, like I'm not in the place to buy right now, I'd rather just take the 400K and run or the 80K and run, I'll do that. So, again, when it comes to double closing, I think it's a fantastic model, highly recommended for any deal that comes across your plate that fits the mold. I am never, ever going to be the guy. You will never see me for the next 40 years of my career because I'll do this for the next 40 years. I'm excited about that. I'm in this game for the rest of my life. You will never hear me say, I only do X, because that's the dumbest thing on planet Earth, because every deal is different. I'm not just a commercial real estate wholesaler. I'm not just a commercial real estate investor. I'm not just a commercial real estate broker. It's whatever the deal requires. And if the deal is good enough, we'll buy it. If the deal pencils to be a wholesale deal, I'll wholesale it. And if it just makes sense to off-market broker it, you better believe I'm brokering it off-market. And again, if you come across any deals, anyone here, if you come across a deal, and because like I said, it is deal dependent, right? If you come across any deals at all that you feel like it might make sense to wholesale this, call me up. I can connect you with my attorney who can really, for the most part, I'm pretty sure he can do it in all 50 states because he runs with a larger firm. They can handle, and with the title company, they can pretty much support you there. And obviously, if I can support in any way myself as well, figuring out how to flip it, we could do that together. Right. So
I got one question for that real quick.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Have you ever done a wholesale where you're open to the buyer that it is a wholesale, or is it every time you're trying to be discreet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll say it like this. When it comes to wholesaling, actually being transparent is actually pretty smart. I recommend it, actually. I think it's smart. I don't think being discreet is always the move. However, it's not, I don't want to always say that there's not a rule of thumb that you should be discreet 100% of the time or be clear 100% of the time, right? There's not that. It depends on the buyer. When the buyer is somebody and I trust, and I'm very straightforward with all the guys that I do a lot of business with, I am super straightforward because even two of the guys I work with very regularly, we have the same attorney. We use the same attorney. So we've even used the same attorney on deals that I've wholesaled to them. Right? I've flipped deals to them and we use the same exact attorney, right? And we sign forms saying we know we're using the same representation and the consequences of doing so. And I'll flip them the deal and they know exactly what I have it locked up for and they know exactly what they're buying it for, right? Very transparent. But I want to be clear. In some instances with people that you do not know, right? And or you've never closed a deal with, I would highly recommend maybe being a little discreet about it up front. Get them to sign the contract, put down a deposit, and then after due diligence, they can disclose it. It's okay. Because to be honest, what people do is that they blow it out of proportion. Oh, what do you mean? Because they get worried that they're paying $1 million fee to you, right? Or $2 million. They get worried that they're paying you an astronomical amount of money. And in some instances, people have paid me an astronomical amount of money. In some instance, right? Astronomical is all to the beholder. But at the same time, if the deal is good enough, they're still going to close, right? If the deal pencils and they're going to make 40% a year on their money or whatever the heck, 20% a year and internal rate of return, they're still going to buy it. I just don't like to say like always be transparent or always be discreet. Like I don't, there's not a rule of thumb there. It depends on what the situation is. And also, last thing I'll say about wholesaling, keep in mind when you're doing a wholesale deal, always do the following. My letter of intent will always say two things you have to make sure you always do. Or a couple things real fast. Rules of thumb when you're wholesaling. Very important. Number one, you always write an LLC. Okay, you have an LLC. I always do my LLC or an LLC assigned. Okay, in my letters of intent, it says at the very top. You write your LLC, so 123 Main Street LLC and or an LLC assigned. That's the buyer. Okay, again, you're the buyer. You're going to sign your name at the bottom, but that's one. Two. Okay, because you want to make sure that you can assign it and they agree to that you can assign it. Okay, just in case, because sometimes you don't have to double close. You might be able to assign it later in the transaction. You don't always have to double close, but it depends. Two, your deposit amount must be smaller than your buyer's deposit amount. Let me explain. You're buying a deal for $1 million that you're going to wholesale for 1.5 million. Okay, we're going to make 500 grand together. Awesome deal, guys. Okay. The mistake people make is that your deposit is the same. Like if I go into this deal at $1 million, I say 25K deposit, and then my buyer's deposit is 25K. Here's the problem. Let's say you both get outside of your due diligence period and you're like a week or two away from closing, and then your buyer cancels the deal. They lose 25K. Now you get your 25K, but you still have all of your attorney fees. So you always want to make sure, ideally, we like to do double. Our rule of thumb is double the deposit, which means I'm going to try to, by the way, on my wholesale deals, I want to try to negotiate the lowest amount of deposit amount that people will even accept. We have a deal right now it's actually a $900,000 purchase. My deposit amount is $5,000. Now, my buyer's deposit is $25,000. Perfect. Okay, must be at least double. That's fine. Because guess what happened also? That seller actually negotiated back to me because I offered $5,000. The attorney asked me to come up to $10,000. So now I'm at $10,000, but my buyer is at $25,000. So that's a big thing. Make sure your buyer's deposit is a minimal double, 2x your deposit. Okay, very, very, very important. Next, what I always like to do is that again, unless it's a home run deal, guys, like it is like, I mean, even like this deal we're talking about as an example, $1 million deal locked up for 1.5 million, and you like all day long, let's say all day long, we know we're going to sell for 1.5 million. Sure, you can probably get into a contractual agreement and just lock it up and just make sure you have a very long due diligence period. Extend your due diligence period. I would recommend at least 60 days, minimum, at least 60. If you go for 90, all the better. Because your due diligence period must be longer by, I would recommend at least 2 weeks longer than your buyer's contract. So that means my due diligence, our due diligence, we're doing this deal together on this $1 million deal. We're flipping for 1.5. Our due diligence should be, let's just call it, let's say 60. Let's say our due diligence on this deal is 60 days. And then our buyer's due diligence period would be at most 45 days, right? And the reason why we do this is because we want our buyer to get to close out due diligence before we close out due diligence. Again, you want to make sure that your buyer closes out due diligence before we do. Okay, because a bad thing that can happen is that your due diligence, let's say, is because you're trying to make our deal look really good. Like, oh, we'll just do 30 days due diligence, 30-day close. And then you get a buyer for 1.5. We have it locked up for $1 million. We got a buyer at 1.5, but they want to do a 60-day due diligence and a 60-day close or whatever the heck they want, right? Let's say 45-day close. So 60-day due diligence, 45-day close. You're 30-30. You are going to get you're screwed, right? Because what happens if the guy goes through due diligence and in day 47, you're already out of due diligence, he cancels the deal. What are you going to do now? You might have to buy the deal yourself, right? So you always want to make sure your due diligence and your closing time frames, by the way, are longer than what your buyer is going to do. So that's why what we try to do is we try to lock it up almost simultaneously. So we pre-negotiate, we get a deal locked up, we get the seller to agree to at $1 million, and then we negotiate a deal, let's just say at 1.5 million, and we get a buyer to write up an LOI for $1.5 million with all the terms that they want. And then, like, let's just say they go, I want to do 25K deposit, 1.5, 25K deposit, 30-day due diligence, 30-day close. Here are my terms. They give me all their terms. And then what I'll do is that I'll write up a contract at $1 million, and I'll say $5,000 deposit, 45-day due diligence, 45-day close, and then the same exact terms, but even a little bit more exaggerated. Because if they'll say only, contingent upon environmental inspections only, I'll do contingent upon all inspections, right? Like, and then they'll say contingent upon, whatever, I'm trying to think of another example here. Contingent upon, let's say that they're negotiating a lease, contingent upon, lease being completed and deposit being received, right? I'll say things like contingent on the building being 100% occupied and, or whatever. Like, let's just say there's even another vacancy. I'll make it all this different stuff and I'll try to negotiate more so than they will. And then I'd rather get rid of items than have to add an item. And then because then I'm screwed. I'd rather have plus, right? Like their terms plus to make sure I'm protected. Because the last thing you want to have happen is if your buyer has something saying like contingent upon environmental inspections and you don't have that as a contingency, and then your buyer cancels because of an environmental issue, or you're trying to fight an environmental issue, but the seller's not about it because you didn't say it. That's the best way that I would highly recommend to protect yourself, making sure that every one of those items is checked, making sure you're in a powerful position to make great money on your wholesale deal.